Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my special guest is Scott Ritter. He is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. He's also a former United Nations Special Commission's weapons inspector. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and bring him back. What's going on, Scott? Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
We are doing great. We were just talking about Stephen A. Smith possibly running for president. So we're having a lot of jokes tonight. But we have quite a bit to discuss, Scott. I want to start with the recent announcement from Donald Trump, because right now, for those who are not aware, Donald Trump apparently has spoken with Vladimir Putin about ending the war in Ukraine. And it sounds like it's on the pathway to happening. I want to play this clip here. It was something that Trump said earlier today about NATO and Ukraine. Everybody check this out.
Yesterday were pretty accurate. I don't see any way that a country in Russia's position could allow them, just in their position, could allow them to join NATO. I don't see that happening. And long before President Putin, Russia was very strong on the fact that I believe that's the reason the war started, because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO, and he shouldn't have said that. As soon as he said that, I said, you know what? You're going to have a war now, and I was right about that. This is a war that would have never happened if I were president.
But you don't think it's President Biden's fault, not President Putin? I mean, he's the one.
I think Biden is incompetent, and I think when he said that they could join NATO, I thought that was a very stupid thing to say. I thought when he said, well, it depends if it's a minor incursion. In other words, it's okay if Russia does a minor incursion. I thought that was a very foolish thing to say. Yesterday were pretty.
Okay, Scott, that was one of the statements from Donald Trump earlier today. I want to get your take on this. He's talking with Vladimir Putin about possible peace talks. And apparently, from what I understand, Zelensky may not get anything, I guess, that he wants, if I'm understanding correctly. But the press they are describing this as though they said Donald Trump is surrendering to Vladimir Putin. I want to get your take on this.
I don't understand how Donald Trump's surrendering to Vladimir Putin. The last I checked, Donald Trump ran on a platform of bringing this war to an end. I also think that you can't bring this war to end unless you approach this problem realistically. For those who think he's surrendered, what do you propose? I mean, I'm always curious for the people that are critical of Donald Trump. What do you propose? That Ukraine joins NATO? That's why the war started. Therefore, the war will continue, and Ukraine's losing badly. Not just Ukraine's losing badly, Europe's losing badly. NATO's losing badly. It's not as though Europe, NATO, and Ukraine are sitting there going, hey, we're still in the game. It's only a 2-point game, and we got like 10 minutes left. We're still in this game. Let's keep going. They're down 100 points, and there's like 2 minutes left in the game, and it's clear they're not going to pull this out. Trump's trying to save lives. I mean, and that's the other thing. All the people that are critical, Trump's surrendering. Tell that to the Ukrainian mom whose child's going to live because this war ends soon, because otherwise the child just dies. Tell that to the people who live in Odessa right now in Kharkov, who want to be part of Ukraine. But if they continue with this war, Russia will take those territories and absorb them, and then they won't have anything. Tell that to every American out here who's alive today who won't be if this war goes south and becomes a nuclear war between Russia and NATO. So did Trump surrender? No. First of all, he's not. This isn't Trump's war. He hasn't lost anything. He's just trying to stop it. He's trying to bring it to an end, and he's doing it realistically. Look, he had a guy named Keith Kellogg. Everybody might be familiar with that name. He was the Ukraine special envoy. Keith Kellogg has been advising Trump on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and much of Donald Trump's initial thinking on how this war would come to an end came from proposals floated by Keith Kellogg. But in the past 3 weeks, Keith's plan has been sort of leaked out to the press, and the Russians have said straight up, no, we're not doing this. And Trump knows he has one shot. You get to do this one time with Putin, and then if it doesn't work, Putin doesn't play the repeating game. He'll just say, fine, we just complete the war without you. We don't care. So you get one shot to do this right. Keith Kellogg's plan was destroyed. So what happened? Kellogg was supposed to go to the Munich Security Conference and present his plan, I think this coming week. He headed there, and then Trump said, no, you're not presenting that plan. Why don't you go talk to the Europeans and NATO? And off he went, but he really didn't get that much of a conversation there either. Trump had his 90-minute call. Putin will not have that phone call unless he knows there's a chance of success. Putin doesn't entertain those calls, just like an American president would. You don't pick up a call from somebody desperate. You pick up a call after your staff has worked it out, what's going to be said, what you're going to talk about. And, so they had 90 minutes where they laid out the basics. Ukraine will never, ever, 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 ever be a member of NATO. It's just it. That's not surrendering. That's a Russian demand. And since Russia won the war, Russia gets to make that demand. Trump made it clear that United States troops will not be going into Ukraine. Zelensky is saying there has to be peacekeepers, European, but it won't work unless there's American troops, a significant number. And Trump went, no. And he said, and if Europe wants to do this, understand, we won't allow Article 5 protection. It won't be a NATO peacekeeping force. It'll be a European peacekeeping force. No European nation is going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine without Article 5 protection. So what he's saying is there won't be peacekeepers. And that's what the Russians have always said. There won't be peacekeepers. We can go on. Military aid. Trump said, first of all, he's curtailing it. Then he said, what we will provide will be linked to Ukraine's ability to pay for it. He sent the Treasury Secretary over there to do a deal where Ukraine was supposed to sign away American access to the Ukraine's, rare earth metals. Zelensky didn't do the deal, which means Zelensky gets no weapons from the United States. Puts all the pressure on Europe, and Europe can't do this, can't afford it. This isn't surrender. This is reality. This is the reality of the situation. Trump is trying to bring this conflict to an end in a way that's best for Russia, believe it or not, for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the United States. The only thing he's surrendering to is reality. And God bless him for doing it, because we had 4 years of a president just playing stupid games that ended up killing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. The fact that Trump has said no to NATO, this was what the Russians said from the very beginning. They said, Ukraine can't be a member of NATO. And Biden said, no, you can't, you're not allowed to dictate. Russia, we're not dictate, we're just telling you it isn't going to happen, ever. And the war was because of that. NATO has admitted it. Stoltenberg and now Rutte have said, this is because of NATO expansion. That's what this war was all about. And Trump just said, no, they're never going to join. If Ukraine had accepted this reality back in March of 2022, the war would have ended, because there was a negotiated peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. But Boris Johnson flew in and put the kibosh on that. And as a result now, Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of additional dead, 20% of their territory, and they've lost this war. It all could have been prevented simply by saying the obvious. Ukraine will never, ever, ever, ever be a member of NATO.
And this was agreed upon after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that NATO was not supposed to expand, at least further to Russia, towards Russia. It was not
1 inch eastward. Not 1 inch eastward was the exact quote from James Baker to Mikhail Gorbachev, repeated over and over again by every foreign minister. People said it wasn't in writing. Now it turns out to have been in writing. And, they just tried to deny it. And now it's just painfully obvious. I mean, James Baker came back and reported to the National Security Council of George Herbert Walker Bush and said, yeah, I told Gorbachev not 1 inch eastward. And they went, not so fast. We think actually there's going to be a lot inches eastward. And then we lied to, Bill Clinton lied to Boris Yeltsin, then expanded it anyways against the objections. And that's what Trump said. He said, this isn't Putin, making outrageous. He said, Russia has been against this from day one. And it's true. It's about Russian national security interests. And the interesting thing about Trump, we can mock him all we want, and there's a lot to mock sometimes. But John F. Kennedy, one of the classic speeches of the modern era was the speech he made to American University in June of 1963, where he talked about the potential of peace with Russia. And one of the things that John F. Kennedy said in that speech, and it's quoted all the time, is the absolute need to get into the shoes of the other side, not because you're surrendering, but because you have to see things from their perspective, to understand where they're coming from. And my God, because JFK said it, oh my, we all bow at it, as we should. It's a brilliant speech. Donald Trump, in his Donald Trumpian way, just said the same thing. He said, it's just from the Russian perspective, it's just not going to happen. But now that's called surrender. If JFK had done it, of course, he would have done it more eloquently. But, people would have said, my God, what a genius diplomat this man is. But it's Donald Trump, so it's surrender. No, Donald Trump is applying JFK-type thinking to solve this problem. He just does it in a New York City realtor fashion, which isn't as smooth as, Hyannisport.
This is a good point. And another thing, too, I do want to mention this. He mentioned about Russia and the future of the G7, which used to be the G8. Everyone listen to this.
Do you want to have Russia back to the G7, sir?
I'd love to have them back. I think it was a mistake to throw them out. Look, it's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8. And, I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back. Obama and a couple of other people made a mistake and they got Russia out. It's very possible that if that was the G8, you wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. And if I was president, you definitely wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine. But
so that's an interesting point there. He's bringing up that he's interested in bringing Russia back to what used to be the G8 and it's now the G7 because Russia was removed from that. But to bring them back, it sounds like he is more willing to want to work with Russia in some way, shape, or form, whereas Biden and Kamala did not want to work with Russia. And I think it's just, something Professor Wolf said when I talked to him a while back. He said that the United States government is going to have to be willing to work with other countries like China and like Russia, because number one, there's the economic factors, right? Like China's economy is booming. And I mean, if you look at Russia, like their economy was able to withstand the sanctions that the US government put on them. And it's only inevitable that in some point, it's like we're trying to smother these countries when instead we should be trying to find a way to work with them.
The Biden administration, if you go back and look at their national security strategy document, which was promulgated early on in the Biden administration, first they did a draft presidential guidance, and then they later on, but it made it clear the defining characteristic of America's, national security needs were the rules-based international order. They straight up said it. And this is the system of organizations and, agreements that were put out there, the world, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, NATO, everything that has nothing to do with the United Nations in the rule of law, but everything to do with America writing the rules and creating institutions to ensure American hegemony over the world. Initially to contain Russia as part of the Cold War strategy of containment, but then once contain the Soviet Union, once the Soviet Union collapsed, to fill that vacuum and control the world, literally about American hegemony. And the Biden administration set that down, said that's what defines us. That's the role. In order for that to happen, you have to have an adversary. I want to remind people that the rules-based international order was created during the Cold War in order to justify America's absolute control over everything. You needed an adversary that could justify that. When the Soviet Union went away and collapsed, we had to create a new adversary. And what we did is we recreated Russia as the enemy. Russia's not the enemy of anybody. I'm just here to tell you guys, I've been studying Russia my entire life. And while they're not perfect, and while there's things that we could always seek to do better, they are not our enemy. They're not trying to invade us. They're not trying to dominate the world. There is no Russian equivalent of the rules-based international order out there. We have manufactured an enemy, and we use Russophobia, the irrational fear of Russia, to dumb people down. We don't like Americans to travel to Russia. If you do, the FBI comes and visits you because they don't want you to know the truth about Russia. If Tucker Carlson goes there and comes back and tells you about the Moscow subway and how clean Russia is, it's Russian propaganda. You can't believe any of that. We just make things up about Russia. What we're finding out is that the United States government has actually paid independent journalists around the world to spread lies about Russia. Why? Because we need an enemy to justify continuing the rules-based international order. And that's what's happened here. Obama, tried the reset. I mean, it was the biggest joke in the world, conceived by Michael McFaul, who sells himself as a Russia expert, but what he's an expert in is the exploitation of the defeated Russia. He's a guy that went in there in the 90s. He was one of the people that, backed Boris Yeltsin. And everybody's like, well, what's wrong with backing Boris Yeltsin? Wasn't he sort of the Democratic leader? No, Boris Yeltsin was a brutal dictator. Democratic leaders don't put tanks in the street to fire on the parliament because the parliament disagrees with their policies. In October of 1993, Boris Yeltsin put tanks in the streets, assaulted the parliament, slaughtered parliamentarians because he's a believer in democracy? No, because he's a brutal dictator. And the United States backed him. Don't believe me. The deputy, the charge d'affaires at the embassy in Moscow, American charge d'affaires, wrote a memorandum. It's called the Second Long Memorandum, sort of a takeoff of George Kennan's original 1946 long memorandum, which created the conditions for containment. But this one talks about how America actually destroyed Russia's ability to create legitimate democratic institutions by backing Yeltsin. We bought a president. We bought a Russian president. We paid for an election, 1996. We got him reelected. We orchestrated this thing. We destroyed all potential for legitimate democratic institutions. And this was what Michael McFaul did. And so now Michael McFaul is in the business of destroying and suppressing Russian democracy. And he's Obama's number one advisor on Russia. And he says, let's have a reset. But the reset, I just want to remind people, because this is important. The reset was never about creating the conditions for American-Russian friendship. The reset was about keeping Vladimir Putin out of the presidency. You remember there was a time when he swapped with Dmitry Medvedev, and Putin became prime minister, and Medvedev became the president. The reset was supposed to empower Medvedev to stay in the presidency and keep Putin out of politics. Joe Biden actually went to Moscow in 2011, I believe, and held a meeting with the Russian opposition saying it would be a bad thing for Russia and Putin if he ran again. Could you imagine a Russian leader coming to America and saying it would be a bad thing? Meeting with the Republicans, it would be a bad thing if Kamala Harris ran for president. I mean, as a Republican, you're like, well, we think it's a bad thing, but it's none of your business. This is America. This is our election. How dare you come in? But Biden went in there and did this, trying to keep Putin out. The reset was all about manipulating Russian politics, interfering with Russia. Russia kicked USAID out of Russia in 2012. And at the time, we're like, oh, my God, look, they are destroying legitimate people trying to build democracy. Well, we now know the truth of USAID. It's a regime change operation. It was a regime change operation in 2012. That's why the Russians kicked it out. And now we're seeing the truth about it. We have been setting Russia up to be this boogeyman from the very beginning because we don't want Russia to stand on its own 2 feet. We don't want a Russian leader who says, we're not going to bend the knee to the United States of America like Boris Yeltsin did. And for that reason, we have to get rid of them. We have to oppose them. And so we create the conditions for this conflict. Donald Trump's coming in and saying, I'm not playing that game anymore. That's where we're at.
Scott, this goes all the way back to, are you familiar with the Wolfowitz doctrine?
Oh, yeah. Me and Paul go way back.
So for those who are not aware, the Wolfowitz doctrine is a doctrine that basically said that no other global power could be, larger than the United States. That the United States, that no
global power or collection of powers.
Right.
We couldn't even allow. We can't allow an alliance. We have to be more powerful than any single nation or collection of nations. We have to be the dominant power in the world.
Yeah, a lot of people are not aware of that or familiar with it, and that just reminds me a lot when we talk about Russia, we talk about China, all these other countries that the U.S. is heavily like criticizing. Again, if you guys talk to people that have been to those countries, like Danny Haifong, I know a lot of you watch Danny Haifong. Danny Haifong goes to China. He's been multiple times. He has videos of him in China. Does it look like it's what our government is telling you it is? Same thing. Some of you were watching the interview with Tucker Carlson when he interviewed Vladimir Putin, and he was like, look at what we see in Russia. And he was talking about the subway. He was talking about the food. He took you into the grocery store. They have better food than we do. Does it look like what the government was telling you about Russia? This is why I feel like it's like their goal is to brainwash you for you to think negatively about those countries. So you never even, and think about visiting those countries. Oh God, no, I would never want to go there. They're horrible. They're this, they're that. And so it reminds me of the Wolfowitz Doctrine, because again, like these countries, they are powerful countries. Like we got to understand, I said this before, that the US government, like we are in decline. We went up, and I feel like we hit our peak and that we are in a decline phase. Now, what do they say? Every empire eventually falls. And there are other countries, you see this, China is growing economically, Russia's growing economically. And it's like our government has been trying to find ways to stop these other countries from doing well economically.
Well, again, we don't know how to operate in a world where we are just another major power, because that's the reality of the United States. And look, we're a powerful nation. There's no doubt about that. We may even be at this point in time the most powerful nation in the world. But as you pointed out, the numbers are conspiring against us. Most very powerful, healthy economies don't have a $36 trillion debt that's going to balloon to 54 before you know it. Most countries that have a healthy relationship with the world don't have to rely upon a $1 trillion defense budget to prop it up around the world. I mean, if we got along with the world, we wouldn't have to have, the ability to kick the world's butt. That this is just the facts. We are a nation that is very much on a downward trajectory. I'd like to believe that we can find, our rightful place and level out, and that we can be, one of the major players in the world today, where you sit around the table and we're at that table. And when we speak, it's like E.F. Hutton, people listen. But see, we're used to, we could talk about King Arthur in the round table, but we have to be King Arthur. You see, we have to be in charge. We won't tolerate anything other than that. Whereas, we can't accept the fact that we just might be Lancelot, powerful, cool guy, but we ain't King Arthur anymore. And maybe there isn't a King Arthur. Maybe there's just a bunch of knights of the round table that get together in the big three, sit there at we could be the big three, but we're not King Arthur anymore. And that's a reality that most Americans can't handle. I mean, most Americans are so, chest thumping, USA, 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 but they do it out of ignorance. They don't even know what makes us great, what makes us powerful, what makes us influential anymore. We need to adjust. And I think what you're seeing with Trump is this adjustment. I mean, look at what he's doing with Europe, because this isn't just about a surrender to Russia, what they call it. This is recognizing Russia's rightful place in the world. Russia's not seeking to invade Europe. They can't invade Europe. Just so people understand that, they don't have the military capacity to invade Europe. They've got 900,000 men fighting a winning effort against Ukraine. But now if you want to go on into NATO, you're fighting a front that goes from Finland all the way down to Romania and everything in between. You're going to need, 2.7, 3.2 million men to fight that war.
And it seems like
that.
Yeah, it seems like I want to show people this, because this is another thing. A lot of things were said today. So guys, please brace yourselves. This is another thing that Donald Trump said about holding a summit with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Like, I swear to God, this is like a totally different government right now with foreign policy. Listen to this, guys.
See one giant summit with you, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I could see that. let things calm down a little bit. You know, when I left, we had no Middle East problem. We had no Russia going into Ukraine. They never would have done it. Putin never would have done it. And I came back and we got like the whole world is blowing up. So when we straighten it all out, then I want to have one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
If you want to see one giant.
So that sent shockwaves around the internet, by the way. I want to get your take about that. Because again, like, you know, I'm a lefty. Of course, I don't agree with a lot of like Trump's policies.
Yeah, I get it.
But I 100% agree with
Sabby, be careful. Your followers are going to say, you've drank the Kool-Aid. You've bought into Trump. MAGA's got you. MAGA owns you now. Sabby, no, Trump's saying the smartest damn thing a president said in a long time. You morons out there, you Trump haters, get the hell out of my life. This man's talking about doing things that should have been done a long time ago, creating the condition to cut $1 trillion defense budget in half. That means instead of spending $1 trillion building weapons that will destroy the world, we're only spending $500 billion. That's still a lot of money, guys. That's, we need to cut even further. And no to nuclear war. You got, again, Sabby, I don't mean to be overly dramatic here, but all the morons who are out there criticizing you and me and everybody else who go, well, that's innovative thinking. We all almost died this fall. The history will be written someday about how close Joe Biden brought us to a nuclear war with Russia. In November, Joe Biden willfully violated the red line set by the Russians in their nuclear doctrine that would have allowed them to use nuclear weapons. We did it willfully. And when this was briefed to Congress, what scared the congressman that I talked to who received the briefing was not just that the finding out that the Russians weren't bluffing, because there's a lot of people saying, well, the Russians are just bluffing. The CIA came and said, no, they're not bluffing. They're really going to go to nuclear war over this. They said that's not what bothered them. What bothered them was the Biden administration saying, we're ready. Don't you remember the briefing that was given by the planning officer of Strategic Command to a think tank in Washington, D.C. at that same time, where he said, no, we're ready for a nuclear exchange with Russia. A nuclear exchange, guys, that means cities will be blown off the map. That means tens of millions, if not more, people will die. And we were this freaking close. We were closer to a nuclear war at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so, for all you Trump haters out there, if the only thing Donald Trump did is say, I want to stop a nuclear war, I'm all on board, because a nuclear war is what can kill us all. Everything else is problematic. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, he isn't a friend of Israel. I know that's a problem for a lot of people, although we can get into that, because I think he just pulled a big one on Israel. But again, all you Trump haters will never give him credit for that.
Well, let's get to that in just a second. I wanted to ask you one more thing about Russia first before we move over to Israel, because I 100% agree. And I think most lefties would agree with cutting the military budget. I think a lot of us have been calling for that for quite some time. So I 100% agree with that. What do you say, Scott, to people who say that, but Russia was still wrong to invade, to go into Ukraine?
I'd say you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're ignorant as dirt. You don't know anything about Russia. You don't know anything about Ukraine. Because to say that proves you know nothing. Because I will ask you about Stepan Bandera. And you'll say, well, that's in the 1940s. Then I'll ask you about the CIA operation that kept the Banderas relevant up until 1990, when we paid the Banderists to disrupt Russia from 1948 to 1990. Did you know that? No, you ignorant, stupid punks. Do you know that right down the road from me, 60 miles away in the town of Ellenville, New York, is a Banderas Nazi camp? Every summer, they run 3 iterations of Ukrainian American youth through, who wear the brown frickin' uniforms of Stepan Bandera, carry his portrait in a torchlight parade where they sing songs glorifying the slaughter of Poles at the Volyn massacre. You didn't know that, did you? You idiots. I get so mad at these people. You did know that the CIA has been funding regime change operations in Ukraine to empower these nationalists. I'm not talking about 2014, which most of you might have some vague, but if I said, the Orange Revolution, 2004, 2005, you do know that a guy named Viktor Yanukovych won that election. And then we came in, interfered, so they did a rerun. He won that too. Constitutionally, he must be the president, but that wasn't the outcome we wanted. So we ousted him, put in a nationalist. You know what the first thing that nationalist president did, Yushchenko? He made Stepan Bandera a national hero of Ukraine. That's like saying Adolf Hitler's the national hero of Germany. Yep. That's how bad it is, you morons, you idiots, God, I despise you because you sit there and pretend that Ukraine is the innocent party here. They are not the innocent party. The United States has been manipulating Ukraine to be a thorn in the side of the Soviet Union and now Russia. And then what happened, though, is in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, who was supposed to be pushed aside, came back and he won an election. Oh, my God, the pro-Russian guy won an election. And we couldn't stand that. So then 2014 comes along, Maidan, CIA, Victoria Nuland, cookies, violence. We now know that it was the Banderas funded by us who went up and shot the cops and shot the protesters and tried to blame it on the police who weren't shooting the protesters. It was the Banderas who murdered them to create a perception to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych, but they couldn't handle that because they got rid of Viktor Yanukovych once before. Now they had to finish the job, which meant to get rid of all the Russians in Ukraine. You guys don't know that, do you? You don't know what they did. You don't know what they did in Odessa, where they burned 48 Russians to death. You got this stupid Ukrainian parliamentarian running around and everybody, he's his little darling. He kicked the bodies of the Russians who jumped out of the burning building to make sure they were dead. He's a Banderist scum. They all are. Then they tried to move on Crimea, but the Russians wouldn't let them because Crimea is primarily Russian population. And the little green men came in and they said Crimea belongs to Russia. Then they moved on Mariupol. Do you want to know why they call it the rape of Mariupol? Because the Azov people came in there and literally raped Mariupol, raped the Russian women, murdered the Russian men, seized control of the city, and created it to become the headquarters of the new Nazi regime. When the Russians retook Mariupol in 2022, they found the headquarters, Nazi memorabilia, the everything, all of it. That's what they are. They're Nazis. And Zelensky, Mr. Peace-loving Zelensky, ran on a platform of peace. He had just become president when he held a war council. There's a video where he's telling his cabinet members, I am going to war against Russia. I am going to war in the Donbass. I am going to finish this anti-terrorist organization, because that's what he called the Russians who rose up and said, we're not willing to be kicked out. No, Russia didn't. Russia, in 2015, Russia had the Ukrainian army surrounded in a little town, Debaltseve or whatever, in Donetsk. And if Russia wanted to, they could have killed them all because they had them surrounded. And the Germans and the French, Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, called up the Germans and the French and pleaded, please, 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 don't let Mr. Putin kill us all. So the Germans and the French went to Putin and said, could you please just have peace? And for all you people out there saying Russia wanted Ukraine the whole time, Putin said, sure, but we need an agreement that will make sure that Ukraine's borders are respected. But you can't be killing the Russians. You have to respect linguistic, cultural, religious heritage. And it has to be in the Constitution. It's called the Minsk Agreements. There was Minsk I, and then because the Ukrainians wouldn't do it, Minsk II. And this was Putin's way. He wasn't looking for territory. He just wanted to protect the Russians, to make sure that they weren't butchered by the Nazis. And what did NATO do? Well, we now know. Poroshenko, Merkel, and Francois Hollande, who was president of France at the time, have all admitted that Minsk was a sham. They lied. It wasn't about peace. They were never going to implement it. Minsk was to buy time so NATO could rebuild the Ukrainian army so that it could go to war with Russia. Don't believe me? Look at the slides prepared by the United States Army, who built the training camp in Western Ukraine in 2015 and bragged that every 55 days they train a battalion of 800 Ukrainians here in the West. So they draw an arrow so they can go here to fight the Russians. And we've been doing that since 2015. And we built the army up, and the Ukrainians were getting ready to go in and assault the Donbass when the Russians said enough of this. They tried to warn the United States. They had a meeting with Biden in Geneva in June of 2021, where Putin said, all you have to do is get Ukraine to agree to Minsk. If they agree to Minsk, all this problem's solved. It's done. And Biden promised, he said, Tony Blinken will take care of this. Well, that was in June. In September, Tony Blinken was cutting the secret deals. He's now admitted it. Secret deals sending Javelin missiles and Stinger missiles to Ukraine. When he was supposed to be implementing Minsk, he was preparing for the war. Tony Blinken, was preparing for war. The Russians found out about it, confronted the French and the Germans in October of 2021 and said, okay, one last chance. Are you going to do Minsk or not? And they said no. And the Russians said, okay, no more Minsk. But before they invaded, because they didn't want to invade, they came out in December 17th. They put out a peace treaty. They put out a treaty to NATO and to the United States and said, let's talk about this. All we need you to agree to is that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. And then this problem goes away. We wouldn't agree to that. The Russians tried negotiating directly with the Ukrainians in the lead up to the Russian incursion. Ukraine admits the Ukrainians are laughing about it. We led the Russians on. We led them on right to the very end. We led them to believe there was an agreement. There wasn't. So Russia went in. Everybody's like, oh, the Ukrainians kicked the Russians' ass. It didn't happen, guys. Russia slaughtered the Ukrainians, but the purpose of Russia was never to take Kiev or do anything other than to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. 6 days after Russia went into Ukraine and was slaughtering the Ukrainian army, they resisted, by the way. The Russians did take casualties. I'm not denying that. The Ukrainians went. They started the peace negotiations in Gomel. They had 3 rounds of negotiations in Gomel before they moved to Turkey in March. And by the end of March, they had a completed peace treaty ready to go. The Istanbul Communique, initialed by all the parties. The Ukrainians are actually getting ready to pop the cork and celebrate the end of the war on very favorable terms, by the way, to the Ukrainians, when Boris Johnson flew in and said, nah, it's done. You can't accept this. The United States made the phone call. Boris is right. You can't accept this. And so the Ukrainians turned down the Istanbul Communique and the war began. So for all you morons out there who say Russia invaded, Russia started, you don't know what you're talking about. You are literally dumber than dirt, and you don't deserve to be at the table talking this topic, because all you do is get in the way. Your ignorance gets in the way. And I'm sick and tired of it, because your ignorance has created the conditions that have resulted in over 1 million Ukrainian dead. All you idiots that put the little Ukrainian flag on your social media, we care about Ukraine. 1 million Ukrainian dead, and the numbers are going to be worse than that, people. When the final bodies are counted, when the final tally is done, you're going to find out it's going to be a much higher toll than that, because Ukrainians are abandoning their dead on the battlefield. They're not accounting for their dead. They're lying about their casualties. The West knows the truth. And it's your fault. It's all the ignorant people out there who say, I'm with Ukraine. Why would you be with Ukraine? They're not the good guys here. They've been the bad guys from day one.
Well, they don't. Well, a lot of people, most people don't know, though, Scott. Most people don't know.
Ignorance isn't an excuse, is it?
No, but just remember how a lot of us were misled about the war in Iraq, too. Just remember how a lot of us were misled about that. So, I always try to keep that in mind. That, like,
well, right. I do that. I except you remember where I was on that. I was out there educating people, and I travel around the country and I travel around the world. I briefed the United States Senate. I briefed the United States Congress. I was on every TV network possible. I was speaking at every university possible. I went to brief NATO. I went to the European Parliament. I went to the Japanese Parliament, the French Parliament, the British Parliament, the Italian Parliament. I went everywhere. I talked till I was blue in the face, telling everybody that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So you can't sit there and say, well, we didn't know. No, you opted not to know. You opted not to know. You opted not to believe me. You opted to believe the government. That's it. I mean, I'm just saying, I was there trying to tell the truth about it, because I was the chief weapons inspector in Iraq. If there was one person in the world who knew that Iraq had been disarmed, it's the guy who did it and had the receipts. So. I get what you're saying. So I'm just saying that's a little personal for me, because, I put everything on the line to try and stop that war and try to tell the truth to the American people in the world about the real status of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs. And so when people say, well, we didn't know, I'm going to say, well, you opted not to know, because the truth was there. It was really there. But, again, I have my best friends. I mean, guys I love to death. We would go play, we'd go watch. We're getting a little old to play football, but we'd go to Monday Night Football. And we'd sit there and have the conversation. And I'd be a little bit on them. I'm like, why aren't you guys getting all fired up about this? You're going to be, well, come on, Scott. What do you want from us, man? this is your job. You do it 24 hours a day. We have real jobs. We have real jobs. We have to go do our real jobs, real estate, and we have to do, financial management. And we work our butts off during the day. And when we come home at night, we're sort of tired. We got real wives and real children and real lives, and we don't have time to do all this. And I'm like, okay, I sort of have sympathy for you. I'm there. But then we're watching the game, and they all run fantasy football leagues. They're all in there. And they're sitting there, my God, what a horrible play. The statistics show that if you run through the 2-3 gap with the you would have gotten 5 yards. And I'm like, how the hell do you know all that? Oh, well, we buy these books and all this stuff. So you have time to learn about football, but you don't have time to learn about the thing that's going to get us into a war that's going to change the entire. It's all a matter of priorities, Sabby. It's all about priorities. And most Americans, to be honest, don't set peace as their priority. They give lip service to it, but they don't set it as their priority. They do other things.
That sounds like something my parents would have said, like when I was in high school. They would say, so you're telling me you had time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I ran out of time. Really?
So that brings me to Israel. And we got to bring in this piece here. There's been a lot of talk about Donald Trump's statement here. We get started with this.
In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
Spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing.
President Donald Trump not only intends.
And of course, obviously, Anna's mad about that. But the part there about that right to return, a lot of us are really, really upset about that. We think, obviously, the Palestinian people should not be displaced from their land and their home. What is Donald Trump doing here?
No, he's done it. It's not doing it. Just so you know, the first big interview I gave, I think it was with George Galloway on the mother of all talk shows. After this, I said what I'm going to say now. If you think for 1 second that what Donald Trump put out there is a real plan, that he's going to displace people, none of that was ever going to happen. None of that was. What he was doing was twofold. One, what name did he mention when he first gave that presentation with Bibi Netanyahu white gripping the podium and staring at him like he's crazy? You remember that? Bibi sitting there going, what the hell's going on? Because it took him by surprise. Never once did he say, Israel has a role in Gaza's future. What he said is, I am in charge. America will own it. And we're going to kick all them Palestinians out and create something new. And the world's going to be in there, not Israel. And Israel's going, wait a minute. That's our land. That's our thing. What Trump did is tell Israel, you've created a problem. You're done. For all the people out there, all the Trump haters, and there's many of you out there who say, my God, he surrounded himself with so many Zionists. So many Zionists. Of course he did. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And he won the election. All right. Clever man. He won the election because sort of had the Zionists, placated. Ask Elise Stefanik what role she played in Trump's little presentation before none. She's a big Zionist. People hated that Elise Stefanik was going to be the United Nations ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Michael Huckabee, that good Christian Zionist, insane man, by the way. I despise him. Going to be the ambassador to Israel. What role did he play? Not a damn thing. Marco Rubio, taken totally by surprise, Mr. Zionist. Not a single one of the Zionists that everybody hates was in on that. Why? Because Trump doesn't care about them. I said this from the beginning. Donald Trump will do what Donald Trump wants to do when Donald Trump wants to do it. And the first thing Donald Trump said is, I want peace in the Middle East. You can't have peace in the Middle East if you continue the failed practices of the past. If you went back and said, okay, the first thing we're going to do is get UNRWA back up and running and start pouring billions of dollars of aid into the United Nations that will then continue the permanent concentration camp status of the people of Gaza. If that's your plan, you have no plan. Because that just brings you back to square one. Because then Israel says, well, we have to bring in Kogat. All you haters out there know what Kogat is, right? You've done that. You've done your research. That's that Israeli occupation force that oversees all the aid and runs everything. Even though Gaza is supposed to be free and independent, the Israelis run everything through Kogat. Kogat's not there right now, and they're not coming back because Donald Trump reset the paradigm. Now, he put forward ridiculous things. Why did he do this, you'll say? To get Sabby mad? Well, it worked. To get me mad? Got me furious. Got a lot of people furious. But he doesn't care. The people he was worked on were President Sisi of Egypt and King Abdullah of Jordan. You see, those two neighbors of Palestine who don't give a damn about the Palestinians, backed up by the Saudi Arabians who don't give a damn about the Palestinians, who have forever spoken about how they care, but they don't care. They've abandoned them. They've never committed to them. They won't commit to them. They're scared to death of them. And did you see the press conference with King Abdullah?
Yes, awful. But he agreed. But he said he agreed to take in 2,000
kids. That was a panic mode. But even that, he thought he was going to die when he lands in Amman because he can't do this. He can't betray the Palestinian people. He needs something. Sisi was supposed to have a phone call with Trump, and he canceled it. And here's the ringer, guys. This is the great thing. Sisi immediately did what Donald Trump was trying to get from those Arabs, a counter proposal. Sisi came in and said, no. You don't displace the Palestinians. He did what no Egyptian leader has done. Egypt is going to come in and rebuild Gaza. Saudi Arabia is going to pay for it, and the Palestinian people get to stay there. We have a plan, a phased-in plan. That never would have happened, all you Trump haters, had Trump not come in with this most ridiculous plan in the world. And Marco Rubio just today came out and certified everything I'm saying is fact. He said Donald Trump was waiting for the Arabs to come up with a counter proposal, and they did. And now it's on the table and the negotiations begin. And I think we have something here. What we have here is a totally different way of viewing how to solve the Gaza problem. Is it going to work? I don't know. Is it perfect? I don't know. But what I do know is if you're sitting there saying you support the Palestinians and you believe in a free and independent Palestine, but you were willing to go back and reset the same failed system that failed them time and time again over 50 years, then you don't care about the Palestinian people. Maybe the only person who does care about the Palestinian people is the guy who said that he was going to forcefully displace them, knowing that that wasn't going to happen, and compelling the Egyptians to commit to the rebuilding of Gaza in a way that Egypt has never done before. Donald Trump just plays a different game, guys. It's not about me smoking Donald Trump's weed and getting my mind polluted. He's playing a completely different game, one that maybe most of you just don't understand. Well, it just happened. He put out a proposal that was so ridiculous, so absurd, impossible to implement. I told people that. He's going to forcefully displace the Palestinians. With what? American troops. Really? How many American troops do you think would be needed to do that? I know how many. Do you? It's 100,000. But when you talk about 100,000 American troops, you don't put in 100,000 because you have to have 100,000 more ready to rotate in to replace them in 6 months. And you have to have 100,000 more in a training pipeline. That's 300,000 American troops in a U.S. military that can't sustain that. We're overstretched in Europe. We're trying to redistribute forces in the Pacific. Donald Trump committed to a plan that requires 300,000 troops up front plus another 60,000 to manage the logistics. That's a third of the American military. Isn't going to happen, was never going to happen. But he used that to squeeze the Egyptians and squeeze the Jordanians and squeeze the Saudis. And it worked because now there's a counter proposal there. And Marco Rubio's talking about it, saying that's the plan. That's what's going to happen.
So you're saying this basically pushed or forced the other Arab nations to stand up and act?
Of course it did. Because he was telling the Egyptians, we're cutting off all aid unless you accept the Palestinians.
But Scott, I looked at the recent data, and even conservatives aren't happy about this.
Happy about what?
They're not happy about this plan that Donald Trump has with Gaza.
There is no plan. I just told you there is no plan. It's never going to be implemented. He just are they happy about the Egyptians saying they're going to come in, take Saudi money to rebuild it? Or do they not talk about that? Are they only focused on Donald Trump using American troops to forcefully relocate the Palestinians? Because that was never a plan. Never a plan. It was Donald Trump saying something to provoke the Arabs into putting a counter proposal on the table. And we now have a counter proposal on the table. And if you're unhappy with that, then I say you don't care about the Palestinians. Because now we have Arabs saying that they're going to rebuild Gaza and the Palestinians aren't going to be relocated. And it's going to be done in a way that the Israelis no longer have their footprint on Gaza. I mean, it's changing the paradigm, guys. I mean, it hasn't solved all the problems, but what it's done is not get us trapped into the failed practices of the past.
I get what you're saying. I just don't see Israel allowing that to happen.
They have no choice. This is what people don't understand. Donald Trump sent his Middle East envoy to Israel about a ceasefire that Netanyahu said, I'm never going to accept. And the envoy said, sit down and shut up. People not understand who's the boss here. I know you're all out there thinking that Benjamin Netanyahu's the boss. He's not. Israel will not exist without the United States. It doesn't work the other way around. Israel will not exist without us. They need us. And Donald Trump is a president who's willing to pull those levers. And he told Netanyahu to sit down and shut up and accept a ceasefire that caused his government to almost collapse. Ben Gvir withdrew in protest, almost brought the whole thing down, still laboring to try and keep it together. And now you had a situation where Israel is threatening to pull out on Saturday. That ain't happening because Donald Trump's not going to let it happen. There is one boss in the Middle East right now, and his name is Donald Trump. And Israel knows that. Benjamin Netanyahu sat there white gripping a podium as Trump humiliated him in front of the world by saying, you don't have a say in anything we do in Gaza. And if you think for a second Netanyahu is going to go against Trump, you don't know Donald Trump.
Well, this reminds me of something Colonel Larry Wilkerson said to me recently. He said, which I have to correct the way that I say it. I've been saying that Israel owns the United States, and Colonel Larry Wilkerson said, no, the U.S. owns Israel. And so it reminds me of when Joe Biden said, if there wasn't an Israel, we would have created one. So that kind of tells you, again, when you're talking.
It's a complicated relationship. It's not a black and white relationship. When you have the Israelis putting $100 million to buy an American election, which they bragged about, it was AIPAC. But, what is AIPAC? AIPAC is an American association of American Jews who use Israel for political empowerment in America.
Right.
Okay. That's it. It's about Americans using Israel to control America. It's that. The Israelis can brag all they want about this, that, and the other thing, but the bottom line is it's America playing Israel. We use Israel. As Joe Biden said, if we didn't have Israel, we'd make one because we need an Israel to get away with it. Again, what's being uncovered right now is a level of corruption in the United States that nobody ever thought possible. Or at least maybe we thought possible, but we didn't think it was ever going to be proven. And you're going to find that our relationship with Israel is one of the most corrupt of relationships, that hundreds of billions of dollars flow into Israel and flow back in a money laundering scheme to buy political influence. This is the reality of Israel. But Israel doesn't exist unless the United States. One thing's for certain. If the United States decided that Israel wouldn't exist, Israel would cease to exist. If Israel decided the United States wouldn't exist, we'd still exist. That tells you who wears the pants. All right? It's not Israel. And I'll give you another example of why Israel isn't in charge. Netanyahu wants the United States to attack Iran. And Trump has said, no, that's not going to happen. We're actually going to work on negotiations with Iran. I'd rather do the negotiation thing. See, people don't believe that Donald Trump is actually serious about avoiding wars. He's serious about negotiations.
We're not as trusting towards politicians these days.
No, and nor should we be, because they all lie. And again, I'm going to get in trouble with this, but I don't care anymore. Donald Trump is the most honest American president we've had in a long time because he says what he thinks. All these clips you're showing us are outrageous clips. Why? Because there's no filter. He is just saying what's on his mind. There's no lawyer going, Mr. President, you can't say that. What the president meant to say is, this. Nobody's doing that to Trump. He's just saying it, putting it on the table, and it's so outrageous. But there's no subterfuge. He's letting you know what he thinks, and he's doing it. That's the kind of honesty we don't ever get in Washington, D.C.
So I guess I'll end with this, which is that if Donald Trump ends this war in Ukraine, and if what you're saying you predict to happen in Gaza does happen, what does that say about the Democratic Party, or more in particular, the Biden-Harris administration? Because And I said this earlier today. If Donald Trump ends the Ukraine war, this will be just another thing that Biden and Kamala could have done and refused to do.
Look, yeah, you guys are like, Scott's drank the Kool-Aid. I'm a Reagan Republican. I mean, that Ronald Reagan was my man. And I know he's flawed, and we can have arguments about that. I could be, but I just know that Ronald Reagan saved the world with the INF Treaty. And I think everybody owes him that aggressive attitude, because you'd be dead today if he didn't implement the INF Treaty. So I cut Reagan a little bit of slack. But I've always been realistic about the Republican Party. It's not a perfect party, but it's a party that I thought at least tried to do the right thing up until George W. Bush became the president. Then it just went wacko. Then the Paul Wolfowitz people took over and went off the reservation. The Democrats, I've learned to really respect Jimmy Carter as a person. I think he's flawed as a president. Lyndon Johnson, I think, was a great president, flawed, but again, a great. JFK wasn't really given a chance. They killed him. Franklin Roosevelt, Democrat, come on, save the world. So it's not that I'm anti-Democrat. Bill Clinton came in and he destroyed everything because he's a liar. And he began the process of the Democrat lying to everybody about everything, about this new world order. The Democrats didn't know how to handle success. Inheriting a situation where America was the sole remaining superpower, Bill Clinton corrupted everything he touched. Barack Obama was just as bad, a horrible president when the final say is done about what he did from a foreign policy standpoint. And Joe Biden is just Barack Obama dyed white and dumbed down. And so these are people that aren't trying to solve world problems. They're trying to sustain a rules-based international order that lost its legitimacy a long time ago, and they were unwilling to go with the flow. And what's happened is the Republicans and the Democrats sort of came together to where we literally, if you look at the 2016 election, the one where Donald Trump, came down the elevator, who among us, let's just be honest, who among us thought when he came down the elevator, that's the next president of the United States? We all went, oh my God, here comes the comedy show, the clown show, the whatever is going to happen. And then we looked at the Republican Party. They put 17 of their top Republicans. Jeb Bush, a governor of Florida. Little Marco was there. Ted Cruz. I mean, we're talking about powerhouses of the Republican Party. And Donald Trump crushed them all. Why? Because the Republican Party stands for nothing. And he exposed the lies and the deceit and the corruption and the incompetence of the Republican Party. So this man who should never have been near the White House won the Republican nomination because he embarrassed the entire Republican Party. And then he takes on the Democrats. The Democrats have shown themselves to be just the progressive version of what the corrupted conservative version was, the same people. The Democratic Party can't be trusted anymore, just like the old Republican Party can't be trusted anymore. We have one party today in America that has the ability to sustain political dominance, and it's called MAGA. And we can hate it, and there's plenty of I'm not sitting here saying I love everything about MAGA. I think MAGA dangerously leans towards autocracy, and I'm a big constitutionalist. I'm a little worried about the fact that these people seem not to care about constitutional due process, except that, my God, Biden claimed to be Mr. Constitutionalist, and he sent the FBI into my house because I dared say bad things about his policy. That's sort of against the Constitution, free speech. So that the Democrats are the worst of the worst, is worse than the old Republicans. I don't think they're ever coming back from this. I think they have to redefine who they are. There's going to have to be a new political opposition that's going to have to grow to counter the MAGA movement, and it can't be, the Democratic Party as it exists today. There's so many flaws with the Democratic Party on its whole approach towards, building consensus. Look, if I were a Black American, I'd be so angry at the Democratic Party right now for what they've done to Black America, because they literally treated the Black American community as plantation workers, that every 4 years you get to bring in and dress them up and bring them to church and make them think they're special, and then you send them back to the fields. They've treated the Black community like utter crap. It's so disgraceful. And I blame Black leadership. for allowing this to happen. The leaders of Baltimore, the leaders of Atlanta, who get rich, the leaders in New York City who get rich off of being the black leaders, but their job was simply to serve the white president. And the white president would snap his fingers and the black leaders would come and then bring in their black congregation and they would vote Democrat and nothing good ever happened to the black community. That's the Democratic Party. They were doing the same thing with the Latino vote. They were basically trying to create this diverse group of people whose sole job was to divide America up to make sure that white Republicans couldn't get, Donald Trump surprised me. I never would have thought when Donald Trump was first elected in 2016 that he would be the man that would threaten the Democrats' demographic base. But if you look at the results of the 2020 election, which he lost, he was doing dangerous things. Black males were starting to vote for him. Latinos were starting to vote for him. He was starting to attract, college-educated people were starting to shift away from the Democratic base because they recognized how the Democrats have been failing them. Hey, you can't say that everybody drank the Kool-Aid. That people move away from the Democrats because for their entire lives, the Democratic Party has not served them well. And here comes a man who's actually talking about implementing policies that do this. I think that Donald Trump has destroyed the demographics of the modern Democratic Party. And they're going to have to, I believe I'd love to see more than two parties. I'd like to see a third party. And maybe this is a chance for us to do that because I think Trump has fundamentally destroyed American politics as we know it. And over the course of the next, we're going to see the reality of that in the midterm elections. And then the big test is going to be in the next election. If the Democrats come roaring back and win, then I'm wrong. But I don't think the Democrats can. I don't think they have the ability to organize the nation. The nation doesn't trust them anymore. And if Trump can pull off half the crap that he's trying to pull off, the MAGA is going to be unbeatable. Donald Trump, just so everybody understands this, if he pulls off the trifecta of what he's trying to achieve in terms of stopping the war in Ukraine, stabilizing the Middle East, preventing expansion of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and ending the potential of an Israeli-Iranian war by coming up with a good nuclear deal, and then stopping the potential of a war in Taiwan, any one of those three deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. Wow. But all you Trump haters are out there, he can't get the Nobel Peace Prize. He's Donald Trump. He's the worst man in the world. If he stops the war in Ukraine, you guys do know your history, right? I just expect your audience to be very educated because, Teddy Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize for stopping the Russian-Japanese War. All right? If Donald Trump stops the Russian-Ukrainian war, don't you think he deserves recognition for that? If Donald Trump prevents a war from breaking out over Taiwan, don't you think he deserves credit for that? If Donald Trump can actually create the conditions for peace in the Middle East where there's a possibility of a Palestinian state, doesn't he deserve recognition for that? Or do you hate Donald Trump so much that you can't even consider the possibility that the man may have actually earned the Nobel Peace Prize, unlike Barack Obama, who was just given it?
Well, we'll end it with this. Notori says he is not lying. Scott, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. This is why, again, I tell everybody in the audience, I like to bring on different opinions and voices to come onto the show because I think people do need to hear what other people have to say. But thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. Have a good night and enjoy the comments you're going to get. But
bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.